Hello everybody, this is Nathan from Nathan on Shuffle, and I'm here to kind of start off a new series that I'm working on that I've been thinking about called Defining Albums Through the Years. Basically, I talked about this a little bit in my first video that I posted, that I've been trying to get into classic albums. As I've been developing and really trying to grow my vinyl collection, I watch a lot of YouTubers and kind of see their collections and recognize like some classic albums that they talk about that I just am missing in my collection. So I thought it would be cool to make a list of albums throughout the years that are really classic and important, and you know, of course, music that means something to me, that's kind of pushing me outside of my usual prog stuff and just more into the classic rock and even classic pop kind of realm. And so it's just mainly started as a way for me to beef up my vinyl collection and to include some classics. And I talked about the first two albums that I really started this feature with. They're kind of behind me. Beach Boys' Pet Sounds, and then the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is where I started this. I was going to start with doing an album per year. I went through and wanted to do like one album per every year through about 1965 to the present day. But as I was looking through the lists of albums and things, I was finding some years stronger where there were like a lot of albums that I'd be interested in featuring, and then some years where there was just nothing there that really interested me, because I wanted these to be all not just classic albums and widely considered as sort of masterpieces in their own rights, but also albums that are meaningful to me, that are bands that really are special to me, because my vinyl collection is special and I want it to be pure and just the artists that really matter to me. So this Defining Albums project is not just defining albums in history, although it's partly that, but it's defining albums in my musical growth. And these are all bands that were important as I discovered my musical taste throughout the years. So that's kind of the idea behind this feature. So hopefully that interests you, and it kind of introduces you to maybe some classic bands, or just makes you get re-excited about bands that you've already fallen in love with. But this is just a way for me to beef up my vinyl collection. I plan to do a show like this about once a month, because I can't buy up too much vinyl. It's becoming really expensive. But I like the idea of slowly building this collection of mine and trying to incorporate some of these classic albums that everyone talks about and holds up in high regard. So today's feature is an interesting one. I've decided to feature Chicago, the band Chicago, and this is their second album. They're self-titled, but also kind of retitled, kind of Chicago 2. Most of their albums are signified by Roman numerals. Their first album was Chicago Transit Authority, and then they shortened their name into just Chicago and kind of rebranded with this album. But of course, retroactively, a lot of people consider this Chicago 2, since Chicago Transit Authority is really their first album, their debut, and this is their second album, and they continue with the trend of the next album being Chicago 3, and so on and so forth with a lot of their albums. So this is a really classic album. Kind of interesting when I was really deciding what album to feature here. I knew I wanted Chicago on the list. At first I had Chicago Transit Authority. That was the one I was going to pick because I really love their debut. I think it's classic. I think it just has so much going for it and really impresses me as a debut album. But I decided to go with this one because when I was going to purchase the vinyl, the remastering of the newest version of Chicago Transit Authority wasn't super well reviewed and had a little bit of shaky reviews behind it, so I wasn't sure if I wanted to invest in that one. But this is a Steven Wilson remix of Chicago 2, and I love Steven Wilson's remixes of classic albums, and I thought this is kind of a no-brainer to pick this one up. And looking at reviews and commentary, this is widely regarded by many as their best album, so I thought it was a fair thing to go with and to go ahead and pick this up. And I'm really glad I did. I think that's right on. I think this is the best Chicago album that I've heard, and I've been listening to a lot of their early albums recently in preparation for this show. So this is Chicago 2. Kind of a basic cover here. Of course, the back similar and with the track listing. Inside, kind of classic old-fashioned lettering and kind of some classic notes from the band and so forth. So it's really cool. It's a double album, so there's a lot of material here. and it's just been really fun diving into and listening to this. Of course, Chicago is a band that was formed in 1967 in Chicago, and they started as the Chicago Transit Authority with their first album, and then shortened it to Chicago, not wanting any legal issues with the actual Chicago Transit Authority. And I think it was a good move and really solidified a great punchy title for the group. They're, of course, well known for their brass section for the horns, but they do a lot of blends of like jazz, R&B, pop, funk, all this kind of just melting pot of all these styles all thrown into the mix, especially on these early albums. I know later on they kind of went in a pure pop direction and kind of don't really go into these more experimental elements like they did on their early records. But what I focused on is this earlier period of the band, because that's the one that really speaks to me as kind of a classic rock and prog fan, is when they were at their most experimental and exciting, from their debut up to about Chicago 6 or 7. Seven's really pretty experimental, jazzy kind of album, so that's a really cool one, kind of at the tail end of this period that I'm covering. But the album in question, Chicago 2, is just really punchy and amazing, and really is the band showcasing all of their best abilities. And so it's the one that I wanted to add to my collection and to mention here as a defining album that I recommend for the band Chicago. So the track that I really want to highlight from this album that really spoke to me when I was listening to this was Ballet for a Girl in Buchanan. Just the suite of songs is just perfection from the band. I think it's the highlight of their abilities. It goes from like kind of jazzy and instrumental, and goes through all these different passages with little touches of prog. But there's also poppy elements. The Make Me Smile section, of course, was a big pop hit and really is beautiful with great melodies and great poppy elements that just really play well. One of their best tracks. And of course the Color My World section, which shows a jazzier, kind of softer side of the group. Beautiful singing as well, and just really an excellent section all the way throughout. Just so much on display. I think what gets lost in the mix a little bit from people is how experimental and jazzy that they were in these early albums before they became purely mainly a pop band, that they really had some interesting things. They have some like free jazz, like experimental stuff, especially on their first record. Just really interesting as a prog fan to hear these different compositions. When you just focus on the hits of the band, you kind of miss some of these deeper cuts that really show that the band had a lot of depth to them and a lot of experimentation and just a lot of musicianship. And that's really why they're such an important band and why they belong on this defining albums list. And there's just so much variation on this particular album. There's the Memories of Love, which is like a classical composition, just very beautiful orchestration and just really magnificent, and really showcases a different side of the band that you don't hear very often on like classic rock kind of band records. 25 or 6 to 4 is probably the biggest classic on here, a classic rock staple, and it's fantastic. Great guitar playing by Terry Kath, just goes through so many different fantastic fun movements, and just those guitar solos are out of this world. Some of the best playing. I've heard that Terry Kath is considered one of the best guitarists out there. I mean, probably a little bit underrated even when you're talking about big guitar heroes, but he's just really excellent throughout this whole track. And then it ends with this It Better End Soon suite, which is another kind of, it's a suite of songs that's put together into these movements, and there's funk and jazz, and it's really a jamming kind of work, them jamming on their instruments and just really going for it and seeing what comes out. It's fascinating to see a band like this experimenting and doing so many different things on an album that also features some mega hits. So it's really refreshing to me to see that in these early albums, and why I'm so drawn to them, I think, because they really embrace that. You know, it's just really exciting and cool. And so I'm excited to feature this album. Their whole catalog in these early days is really fascinating. I've been developing kind of a playlist, as it were, of essential Chicago tracks, at least my essential Chicago tracks, the ones that really speak to me and really are exciting. So if you have any suggestions in the comments of like your must listen Chicago tracks, I would love to hear them and see if maybe I should add them to my list that I'm developing, because I'm really trying to, you know, combine all the greatest stuff of these bands, all the really seminal works, and put them into these massive playlists. So that's really part of the project here in a way. So if you have any suggestions for that, I'd love it. If you have anything you want to talk about with the band, please mention it in the comments. And please subscribe if you like what I'm doing here. We have a lot of other defining albums to mention that I think many of you, if you are big Chicago fans, will also like that. So this has been a really good episode of Defining Albums. Once again, Chicago 2, fantastic. Hopefully you'll check it out and check out all of their works around this period and really celebrate into the sound of this incredible band and their experimentation, their jazziness, their pop sensibilities. It's just all there, all exciting, and great music. So thank you guys for listening, for watching, for all that you do, for subscribing. Hopefully some of you subscribe out there to this and like what I'm doing. Thank you all, and just enjoy the music. Thank you.